Thanks very much. So before I start, I sort of want to start with a bit of a disclaimer, because although I'm presenting on the future of sex and relationships education curriculum in Wales, it's not my work, it's the work of the SRE expert panel that I'm going to be reporting. So I will get this to work. Brilliant. So just to give you a bit of an overview, I'm just going to talk first of all about the aim and the remit of the expert panel, and then talk a little bit about the current status and provision of SRE in Wales. Then talk about the future of SRE in Wales, and specifically focusing on the recommendations from the expert panel, and then think a little bit about the next steps. So the aim and the remit of the panel. So an expert panel was established in March 2007 by the Cabinet Secretary for Education, Kirsty Williams. And the panel was asked to identify issues and opportunities that would inform decisions to support the teaching profession to deliver high-quality sex and relationship education, or SRE, in schools more effectively. So we were asked to provide recommendations to the Cabinet Secretary on how current SRE practice might be improved, and also to provide recommendations to the Cabinet Secretary and also to pioneer schools on the future of SRE as part of the Health and Wellbeing Area of Learning Experience, or AOLE. So the panel had ambitious terms of reference, but we felt that it was something that was needed because we urgently need an overhaul of SRE in Wales. So we undertook a series of face-to-face meetings between March and September 2017. We weren't a task and finish group, and we also didn't receive any funding to do any primary research, but we were an exploratory group, working with the current literature and practice and experience, encouraged to think big, and really look at what the recommendations would be for SRE in the future. So that's the panel. If I just share with you now the, there we go, yes, that's okay. The current status of SRE in Wales. So I appreciate that I'm probably, preaching to the converted here, but there's currently a gap between SRE guidance and SRE legislation in Wales. So the 2002 Education Act placed a requirement that all maintained schools in Wales, including faith schools, had to include a basic curriculum comprising of religious education, sex education, and the national curriculum for Wales. The basic curriculum is statutory to be delivered by all maintained schools, but SRE is only statutory in secondary schools and in special schools for pupils that are provided with secondary education. But a key point to note here is that sex education, as defined by the Education Act 1996, is defined as education about AIDS, HIV, and other sexually transmitted infections. So again, thinking about the current status of SRE in Wales, so personal and social education, or PSE, became a compulsory part of the basic curriculum in both primary and secondary schools in 2003. And SRE is largely developed in the context of PSE. So SRE is kind of commonly used to reflect the emotional and social aspects of relationships, sexual health, and well-being. And in 2010, the Welsh Government issued guidance on SRE. And while that guidance is comprehensive and it's rights-based, it's a vision for SRE, it's not statutory. So it's not in the legislation. So what this means is that SRE, as part of the basic curriculum, schools can flexibly make their own arrangements for delivering the components of PSE set out in the framework. And this inevitably leads to variation in the quantity and quality of SRE, and that's something that the ESTIN 2017 Review of Healthy Relationships has found. So that's the current status of SRE in Wales. If I move on now to think about the current provision, so really what we found as an expert panel was that there's a real lack of research looking at SRE in schools in Wales. We don't really know, what's being provided, who's providing SRE, and we don't know what content is being delivered. We also don't necessarily know so much about students' experience or staff experience, parents' experience, or the wider community when it comes to SRE delivery. But we used the information that we did have, as well as international literature, to build up a picture about the current provision, about what's maybe not working so well, and also what we can do to improve. So in terms of current provision in SRE at the moment, as a basic curriculum subject, SRE has a low status and is poorly resourced. And researchers consistently found that when SRE is non-statutory, it has a low priority and a low status in schools. And the ESTIN 2007 and 2017 reviews has found that there's typically insufficient time and resources allocated to teacher training and curriculum planning. And the success of SRE in schools is typically relies on individual teachers' enthusiasm and kind of commitment. And again, this leads to wide variation across Wales. So in relation to SRE being poorly resourced, we also know that teachers are often ill-equipped to deal with delivering SRE and any safeguarding issues that might arise. An international review of the literature by Pandora Pound found that SRE classes delivered by teachers, students often find that they're awkward or embarrassing, and they might feel uncomfortable. And they have concerns about whether the information that they share is going to be kept confidentially. And they prefer expert educators delivering SRE. So that's the first bullet point there. The second bullet point relates to what we know young people think about SRE in Wales and also internationally. So we know that young people tend to say that it happens too little, too late, too biological, too negative, and too risk-focused. So it's not addressing young people's diverse needs, particularly in relation to gender and sexual diversity, positive relationships, consent, and also what's healthy and what's pleasurable and positive for young people. And that's something that they say that it's really important that they want to learn. So to move on, again, thinking about the current provision, we also know in Wales that there is insufficient opportunities for children and young people to influence what they learn in SRE. We understand this really as a wider kind of lack of engagement with children and young people's views, contributing to what they learn in school and how they learn in school. And overall, this leads to a gap then in the SRE curriculum and also young people's lived experiences. There's a gap between these two. So the SRE that they're receiving is out of touch with the realities of their lives. So the content maybe that they receive might seem irrelevant, it might seem patronising or unimportant to them. And as a result, our children and young people might be leaving school ill-equipped to deal with the complexities and the challenges that they then face in their lives. So when we ask young people what they think and what they want to learn in SRE, they're well able to articulate what it is that they want to learn. On the previous slide, it says about being too late, too biological. It's often too health-focused and too risk-focused. And also it's too heteronormative, which leads me to the next point, which, again, young people say on this note that SRE at the moment doesn't currently relate or provide for young people who are LGBT or young people with disabilities. So there's a Stonewall survey out which looks at young people's views across the UK and with a small subsample from Wales. And they found that 3 in 5 students in Wales weren't taught about LGBT issues. And that's not specific to Wales, that's also sort of echoed across the UK. And similarly with young people with disabilities, despite young people with disabilities having equal rights to access high-quality SRE, what we find is that internationally, it's not just in Wales, education and support providers fail to promote and kind of advocate the rights of children and young people with disabilities. Okay, so sorry to paint a bit of a negative picture so far, but in terms of getting to grips with what's happening in Wales and in the UK and internationally at the moment, that's kind of some of the issues that are faced. But we do also know what works in terms of SRE and SRE delivery. A recent synthesis, which looked at international literature, has identified some of these components as important for high-quality SRE. So they say that high-quality SRE, it starts early, it's adaptable and needs-led, so it's driven by what young people want and what they need. It offers a spiral curriculum, so it builds on existing information that they've learnt and also revisits that. It collaborates with external providers, it's of sufficient duration, it's engaging and it's participatory, and it creates a safe, respectful, and confidential learning environment. So that's what works, that's what we're hoping for. And also a whole school approach. So this is considered one of the single most important approaches to high quality, effective SRE. So here it's really important to be reinforcing some of the key messages that are delivered in the curriculum, to make sure that they're being reinforced in different areas of the school and also the wider community. And this is more likely to result in any attitude or behaviour change. So finally, what else works? We also know in order to have effective delivery of high quality SRE, we need a well-trained, confident workforce to do so. We know that most teachers who deliver SRE receive no specialist training in order to do so. And teachers tend to report feeling ill-equipped when delivering SRE, which is anxiety-provoking both for them, but also for the students who then receive SRE. So we know, we're aware of some of the problems, some of the challenges that are being faced, but we also have information about the ways in which to improve this. So what does it all really mean? So as I mentioned, we really found a lack of research specifically in Wales, but we've drawn on a lot of the international literature. And as a panel, we developed 11 recommendations which fall under the following 4 key areas. So what I'll do is just talk through each of the key areas and the recommendations that fall under each of the key areas. So the first key area is the definition, status, and guidance of SRE. So the first recommendation that we want to see is a name change. So from sex and relationships education to move to sexuality and relationships education. So this approach incorporates a much more holistic, inclusive understanding and application of SRE, and it draws upon the World Health Organization definition of sexuality, which is inclusive, it's holistic, it's rights and gender-based, gender equity-based. So that's one move that we would like to see. The second part under this recommendation is making SRE statutory within the new curriculum for all schools, from foundation phase right through to compulsory school leaving age, so from ages 3 to 16. And there's 2 reasons for this. The first is that all children and young people have the right to high quality SRE, and that's part of the UNCRC rights of the child. And also, the second reason is that we know that high-quality SRE, again, not on its own, but high-quality SRE is associated with a range of positive outcomes for children and young people, for their families as well. So we would like to see SRE be made statutory. And then following on from this, we need statutory guidance. At the moment, as I said, there's gaps between the SRE guidance and the SRE legislation. So we need statutory guidance and training in Wales to make sure that educators are able to provide engaging, relevant programs of learning and experience for our children and young people. So that's our first recommendation. If I move on to the second. So here, the second key area that we are focused on is curriculum content, pedagogy, and assessment. So the second recommendation relates to core principles. So here the SRE curriculum should be guided by these core principles, and they're aligned with the Donaldson Review's 10 principles of curriculum design. And so we identified these core principles which SRE should sort of be delivered within. So I'm not sure whether you can see that so well, but I'm going to go through them all anyway, so it should be fine. So the idea is to create SRE, a living curriculum based on these core principles. And right at the centre of this is rights and gender equity-based SRE. So children and young people's SRE, they have rights to a relevant, holistic, inclusive and empowering SRE that's embedded in and promotes gender equity, social justice, safety and well-being. So that's right at the centre of everything we should be delivering for children and young people. It should be rights and gender equity based. So building on from this, which should be creative and curious. So we want our teaching to be creative. We want teaching strategies to facilitate, safe and ethical and agentic learning environments for young people to really start questioning and building on their education. We would like the SRE to also be empowering and transformative. So too often, young people are learning SRE through a highly sort of normative, whether it's gendered, racialized, heterosexist kind of scripts and principles. So fundamentally, we want SRE to be non-judgmental, non-stigmatizing, and also anti-discriminatory. So the third sort of satellite on this is that SRE needs to be experienced near and co-produced. So making sure that SRE is developed with and for young people. So again, this is closing the gap between what young people receive and what their lives actually are. We also want SRE to be holistic. So this means exploring the interconnected ways in which sex, gender, sexuality, and relationships are shared kind of across the world. So it's really moving away from a kind of typical sort of segregated lessons on pornography, on consent, on gender identity issues. So moving to a more kind of whole school approach to sort of delivery of those topics across the curriculum. Another principle would be inclusive SRE. So this relates to recognising the values and diversity and difference across the domains of sex, gender, sexuality and relationships. So again, addressing the fact that young people say SRE at the moment is too heteronormative. And then finally, the final sort of satellite in our diagram is protective and preventative SRE. So supporting children and young people to develop, whether it's their social, emotional, physical literacy, resilience to cope with pressure and stress, knowledge to recognise risk and abusive relationships, not just at an individual level, but also at a societal level as well. So, looking at things like oppression and violence and discrimination at a wider level. So this was our second recommendation, that really we need to be using these core principles as a basis for sex and relationship education. So if I move on to the remainder of the recommendations here, so the third recommendation is that we need SRE to be developmentally appropriate. So here, SRE needs to be based on some of the problems with the current sort of provision. It needs to be engaging, it needs to be relevant, and it needs to be developmentally appropriate. The fourth recommendation, we need to use this whole school approach. So it's considered, as I said, one of the single most important issues for delivering high quality SRE. And what it means is that the core principles aren't delivered just in the classroom, that they're reinforced and importantly not undermined in the wider sort of school environment. So this could be via teaching and learning, it could be via sort of student voice, it could be via school policies. There's lots of ways that we can incorporate a whole school approach. And the fifth recommendation is equal status. So here, to make sure that SRE is really embedded, the panel recommends that the health and wellbeing AOLE must have equal status to the other AOLEs. and the SRE within the health and wellbeing AOLE needs to have equal status to other areas within the health and wellbeing AOLE. So really we want this to be an equal status, and this will address some of the issues with SRE being seen as a sort of side subject. And that this shouldn't just be with the curriculum, it should also be relating to assessment as well. So we talked about a living curriculum with the core principles. We also want to see a living assessment as well. So those are 3 more of the recommendations. If I move on now to the third key area, this relates to training and standards. So here, delivery of high quality SRE, in order to have that, we need well-trained, confident workforce. So what we recommend is an SRE development pathway. There's never before been a certified national professional certificate or development pathway for in-service teachers, and that is something that we would like to see. And we would also like to see a pathway for initial teacher education, or ITE. And this is something that the panel recommends, those 2 approaches to training our teachers. The 7th recommendation relates to having a specialist SRE lead. So we recommend that every school has a dedicated SRE lead. These should have protected hours, and they should be equitable to other curriculum subjects. And the role would involve researching and promoting best practice, liaising with specialist organisations and external providers, and also coordinating that whole school approach, which is one of the other recommendations. So we'd like to see a specialist SRE lead within the school, but we would also like to see a dedicated SRE lead in each local authority. So these would work alongside the consortia and also a national research, training and practice network, which we'd like to also set up. We've got lots of ambitions. And these will provide external support, coordinate training and CPD, and then support embedding SRE and this whole school approach to make sure that it's consistent and that it's high quality. So that's our 8th recommendation. The 9th recommendation, I know there's 11, there's a lot of recommendations. So the 9th recommendation looks at the role of monitoring and also the role of ESTIN. So as part of the whole school approach, we think that schools need to review and reflect on their SRE curriculum every year. And this could be a sort of self-reflection, whether it's based on student experiences, staff experiences, engaging with parents, and again, the wider community. But that is something that we think is really important, kind of monitoring that. And we also recommend that ESTIN plays a role in this. So the ESTIN 2007 and 2017 reviews have been really important and really valuable to us. So we recommend that ESTIN includes the implementation of a whole school approach as part of their inspection arrangements. So the 10th recommendation relates to an SRE excellence mark. So here we want Welsh Government to consider establishing an SRE excellence mark to highlight schools or sort of exemplary whole school approaches to SRE. So the final recommendation, the 11th, this falls under the key area of research and support. So as I mentioned, at the moment there is a real lack of information about SRE in Wales. We really need more information about what's going on in Wales, what's being delivered, who is delivering this, what are the experiences of children, young people, and the important people around them. Is it meeting their needs? Are teachers being trained? If they are, what's the quality of the training like? We need all this information. So we would like more research in this area, and also we would like to see an SRE hub. So this is really to support schools. We understand that it is difficult to find time to find good resources, and also to quality assess the resources. We don't necessarily know when you find them on the internet whether they're any good. So this would be a place that would be an interactive space, so educators, researchers, other organisations can sort of access high quality resources for delivering SRE and to help with that whole school approach. So it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of these recommendations. I'll give you the details of the full report, so if you haven't read them yet, you can go and enjoy. But the summary so far, so the expert panel, as I say, was established by the Cabinet Secretary for Education to provide recommendations how to improve current SRE practice and for the future of SRE in Wales as part of the curriculum reform and as part of the health and wellbeing AOLE. So what we did as the expert panel, we identified, synthesised and evaluated the current knowledge both in Wales and internationally to look at the provision in Wales to develop 11 recommendations under these 4 key areas. So these have been submitted to the Cabinet Secretary for Education for consideration, and we're currently waiting for a response. So if you're interested, which I hope you are, you can find, there's 2 documents. There's a short document, well, I say short, it's not really short, but that is on the left-hand side. It's hosted by Welsh Government. If you type in, SRE Wales, that's probably the first hit. And then there's a slightly longer report that's hosted by Cardiff University, which is the one on the right-hand side. So this is the full details. For further information, there's the Welsh Government contact and also Professor Emma Reynolds, who headed the SRE panel, and there's links to the full reports there. So I just want to think about the next steps. So Professor Reynolds is currently working to support the SRE curriculum, and she's working with the pioneer schools at the moment. As I say, we're waiting for a response from the Cabinet Secretary for Education to see whether she will accept the recommendations, and if accepted, they'll be used in the development of the curriculum before its rollout in 2022. We know there's been a Welsh Government tender for lesson plans and training for years 7 to 9, and again, this is underpinned by the recommendations, so new resources are being developed. But I think one of the most important sort of next steps is also disseminating the findings, so making sure that people are aware of these recommendations and what we hope to happen for SRE in the future. So there's lots of people to thank, obviously the panel members, the people who've attended the additional consultations, and also the pioneer schools, and those who came in to sort of give external presentations to help us develop these recommendations. And I think just finally, I kind of wanted to do something to try and bring these core principles to life. So I know that what we're suggesting, these are significant reforms that are going to demand investment, time and planning. But what we hope is that the outcome will be an inclusive, relevant and empowering curriculum that can learn from and respond and support all children and young people's needs. So our vision is a sexuality and relationship education curriculum that's for lifelong learning and experience. So if our recommendations are approved and implemented, we're confident that over time, Wales can address the much neglected area of SRE and begin to meet the learning and experience needs of our children and young people, our schools, and the wider community. So I thought I would share with you, it is a video that is taken from Agenda, which is a set of resources that are designed to help young people make positive relationships. And it was from the launch of that event. So I think if I click next, it should happen. I just thought that would be a nice way to end, to really bring to life the reason why we are, doing what we're doing, and why we want these recommendations to be accepted to make a difference to children and young people's lives. Okay, thanks very much.